to this computer. All right. All right, here we are. I am the facilitator, convener of this group gathered before you. I'm Terry Rankin. I think of myself as an itinerant semiotician. There's a mouthful of syllables that confuses everybody. Basically, it's a roaming around discerner of signs about truth, about reality. That's more or less a philosopher. So I think myself as a journeyman philosopher with theoretical and applied cognitive science and technology, a zealous conversationalist, and a collapse adaptation guide. That's about enough of a thumbnail for me. And I'm honored to be in the company of Roger Hallam, founder of Extinction Rebellion, Just Stop Oil, Beyond Politics, lots of other activist groups. Been at it for going on a quarter century, I think. Leader
This
of
is my portrait work, by the way.
Yeah, I did. I got yours here. I couldn't get Glenn because you hadn't done him.
I know, he's the only one.
Yeah, but I've got you up there, and there was mine. Glenn, I put one in for you, but I want you to follow up with your own take, because I never quite get you right when I try to describe who you are. You're such a complicated fellow. But I have you down as just a second here. I have you down as an environmental philosopher with theoretical and applied interests in relationships between ecosystems and human health and well-being. Your 2019 book, Earth Emotions, New Words for a New World, introduces everyone to a new vocabulary for describing the full range of those emotional responses and the emergent state of the world. And this is where symbiocene comes into play. Solastalgia, of course, is a clinical term that you invented, and it's now in the United States medical world and the UK medical world. It's a clinical diagnosis. And Fish, what did I say about you? Let me see. Oh, yeah.
Get the piece of paper out.
Say again?
You've got a piece of paper on each of us.
Oh, yeah. I couldn't get your folder from the CIA, but I'm sure there is. I think, Fish, I have you down, or Dwayne Booth here in the U.S. with me is also known as Mr. Fish. Anyone who knows that. Political cartoonist from the deep end and freelance writer, many of the nation's most reputable magazines, journals, and newspapers. Recent books, Go Fish, How to Win Contempt and Influence People. Warning, graphic content, and Then the World Blew Up. Long story short, turning famous books into cartoons, and more in the progress, I'm sure.
Indeed.
So, and just so everyone knows, Fish, I've been stealing Fish's work for at least 5 years, copy and pasting it into my own stuff. So each of you, you can see, Fish, you're the revolutionary artist, visual, iconic artist. Glenn, you're the revolutionary scientific geologist, if you will, or yeah, geological time anyway. And Roger, man, to the core of your being, you're a revolutionary power to be reckoned with as far as the shitstorm we brought upon ourselves. So having said that, let me kick us into a conversation here, if I can get going. I'm going to share a slideshow, and I've entitled this gathering and conversation to be Revolution Rationale. I had it down as revolution apologetics, but there's a preponderance of religiosity to that apologetics term, and I don't want to push that into the conversation. It can come in, I have no problem with it, obviously, but I didn't want to load it up with that, so I changed it to Revolution Rationale. I took a quote, Roger, from the interview you did last April with Aaron Bastani. I think I got that right, on his show Downstream, where you said, and I quote, "Normally, people are primarily interested in meaning. People want to be loved and they want to give love. And if they cannot give love and they cannot receive love, then either they become self-destructive or they become externally destructive." Keep that distinction in mind. In other words, if we're going to think concretely about how we're going to get out of this enormous mess, we have to go back to fundamentals. We have to reinterrogate what we think human beings are and how they tick, who we are and what we do. On that basis, we can design social spaces where people will feel empowered and connected. Then they'll move into social struggle. But you have to get your ducks in a row philosophically first. So I think of this gathering of the four of us, especially the three of you, as a flocking of philosophical ducks. We're here to see if we have our philosophical ducks in a row, sort of. Glenn, this quote from you ties right into what Roger said in that quote. And I read from Symbiosis is Life, Dysbiosis is Death, from your Psychoterratica online journal, I guess, would be a good description for what that is. Here's the quote. Warfare has been part of the human condition since recorded history. The origins of the word war have meanings connected to states of confusion and being mixed up. I can see the relevance of war at a time in history where, to end the biophysical and conceptual confusion, we need a shock to our current system. Many humans, the Earth destroyers or terraforans, are now at war with the environment they inhabit. They're also fighting Earth creating or Terra Nation humans who they see as blocking their freedom to further exploit. Now, before I move on, Glenn, I know I left out the line here that I think you'd like to add in.
Oh, it's just purely that the terraforans, the Earth destroyers, not only fight their opposites, the Earth creators or Terra Nation humans, they also fight each other. So that's a glimpse of hope in the sense that the terraforans are self-destructive as well as destructive of other types of humans and their psychosocial attitudes and beliefs.
Right. And Roger, that ties right into writing and videos that I've seen of yours, where you see the crossroads we're coming to, actually, that we're already at, is we are going to devolve and collapse and plummet into a fascist regime at a global scale, or a revolution is inevitable and justified, as you said in the quote, to avoid that other crossroads, that other alternative. So anything you want to add to that before I move on?
No.
Love a simple answer.
That sounds very convincing to me. I'm always getting convinced by myself. Yeah, that's a bad admission, isn't it? But,
yeah, that's kind of a cross to bear that I can relate to. I mean, people I think, mistakenly think we are really happy with our doomster view of things, right? We're really glad that we know these things. And I'm just stunned when I can tell that that's how somebody perceives it. I'd give anything not to know this. You know, not that I want to be stupid or ignorant. I'd just give anything if it weren't true and I didn't have to know it. You know what I mean?
yeah.
So I keep, and I almost think that I'm suffering from some kind of confirmation bias, because I keep seeing stuff that just makes this doomster reality so vividly true. And the inevitability, the inevitability that we just mentioned from your work. So anyway, let me move on to Fish and get us beyond this slideshow. This is a book cover that Mr. Fish did for Chris Hedges, his second in a series, second volume of 2 that he wrote on war. The first was War is a Power That Gives Us Meaning, a Force That Gives Us Meaning. This is the more recent one, The Greatest Evil is War. And I would say that illustration pretty profoundly illustrates it, Mr. Booth. Oops, I got out of my slideshow, didn't I? My bad. And this is the next one by Mr. Fish. And I hope one day we can find it and get the title, Fish. That would be nice. I'd like to have it. But anyway, it doesn't matter. This speaks for itself so vividly. And in case it isn't recognizable to everyone, the base image, if you take away the George Washington profile and face, you take those away, the image comes from the Vietnam era, where a guy just randomly shot a prisoner in the temple with a snub-nosed .38 pistol. And Mr. Fish brought that image, resurrected it from history, and brought it back into the reality of our times by showing, are we killing ourselves? Or are we killing each other? Are we doing both? Is it homicide? Is it suicide? You know, I think it's a both and that's just brilliantly rendered, I think. So anyway, that's the slideshow. And as I say, I hope, let me stop the share, get it back to the four of us. My hope is that I can turn this over to the three of you, because I've used this introductory stage to introduce you to each other. You know a little about each other, and I hope this takes you a little further. And I want to take that book title from Chris Hedges that Fish illustrated so well as kind of a beginning premise to start with. The greatest evil is war. Because what troubles me, one of the things, many things that troubles me about being actively involved in this existential crisis, this collapse of truth and reality that we're confronting, this extinction that's rushing over us, is that we talk about physics, we talk about biology, we talk about chemistry, we talk about all the sciences, but we never talk about military science. And that's kind of a euphemism for what's going on. Warmongering is a better term, I think. So I want to start the conversation, or ask you to start the conversation among yourselves, especially. I'm getting tired of talking. I want to hear you guys speak to what the issues are and what it is to be a revolutionary from each of your perspectives. So starting with that idea that Fish illustrated for Hedges, can you talk to us a little bit, Fish, about how you and Hedges came to that cover for the book?
I can. I will after I say two things, just in response to a couple things that you said. First off, I would say that to label us as revolutionaries is accurate from sort of an external point of view. I think it would be smarter to recognize that we're revolutionaries in public. Because I think that what we're trying to do is we're trying to tap into what makes a human being, which I think empathy is built in there, love, recognition of destruction, being terrified of destruction, not wanting to contribute to destruction. Because remember, in the public, in the public sphere, there's penalties for giving a shit, right? There's rewards for not giving a shit. So I think that what Glenn and Roger and myself, if I could speak for us, is just speaking the blunt truth of what it means to be a human being first, and asking for participation in recognizing the multiplicity and the commonality that we all share, and the commitment that is really at our centers anyway, to try to literally save the species. Because I think just what I know of Glenn's work and Roger's work, this is not the imperative is such that we're trying to, as pompous as it might sound, my mission is to try to save the humanity that I'm part of. So I'm trying to save myself, but I'm also trying to save this collective that needs a wake-up call. All right. So I just wanted to sort of make that differentiation between just like, because I always get a little uncomfortable when it looks like, this person is committed and actually, applying strategies on how to help us all. So therefore, as a public person, I don't have to step into that realm. Somebody else is doing it. I think they're very good. I can't imagine myself having the talent or the time, or the privilege, in however that manifests, to engage in that fight. So I'm going to be a spectator and watch the people who seem to be professionals and people who know how to do it. That's not going to, nothing is going to come from that. We're actually going to fail. So I think just to call ourselves revolutionaries in public, trying to inspire revolutionaries who we know are in private into the public space to have the bravery to join the fight. All right, so there's that piece. And the other thing that I would say is, and I wrote it down while you were talking, I understand the whole idea that war is the greatest evil, right? I understand that, but I would even challenge that, because whenever I hear things, this is how I approach my work anyway. When I hear things like that, I'm like, well, let me rephrase that using the opposite to see if there's a greater truth there. And I think that there might be, because when you said it, I wrote down that the greatest evil is actually peace. When peace is based on complacency and ignoring how all of us contribute to environmental collapse, right? Because that's what I think keeps us in a state where we can be automatons, you know, and sleepwalk into this inevitable absolute collapse of everything. So I actually get nervous, like when war and violence is in the mind's eye, in the public. That actually to me is just like, finally, you know, now we have something that we can all see. It's been turned into something that is undeniable, right? It's times of peace when I tend to be a little bit nervous. You know, what is solidifying this peace? What is this based on? You know, we've been at peace. Look at peace treaties around the world through history. Sometimes it's because we are shipping arms to them. We are helping them in some way. How are they, you know, exerting peace on their end? So just those two broad things, just with the introduction. This is how I think that is going to be a smart way to sort of go about this, because I know that both Glenn and Roger, just for the work they do, you know, it's not, these things are in one way complicated and more layered, but they're also extremely simple. And I think that's the greatest frustration as a public revolutionary, is just like, this is 1 + 1 = 2. This is not, invite people in, because it is simple to give a shit and to want to show empathy to people and have them show it back. That's elemental, you know. So long as we can keep it elemental, I think that there's hope.
Okay. All right. Point well taken. If I may, Glenn, just kind of hold off just a second. Roger, I know that you're days away from facing sentencing over the Heathrow action, right? That's what you were charged with and found guilty of conspiracy around that, right? And this month, you're going to go before the court to be sentenced for that. So I'm not going to ask a question. I just wanted to get that information into the conversation so that you guys, Glenn and Dwayne, you both know that he's got a lot of skin in the game right now, that we are, I guess, fortunate. Well, you've gotten death threats, Fish, right? For the work
Recently.
you've done. Roger, you've probably gotten death threats, right? I don't know, Glenn, what goes on with you in Australia? Has anybody given you
I've had them from America.
That figures. That figures. So, Roger, I'm going to turn to you. Right?
It's a famous American export, apparently.
Yeah. Comments, Roger?
Well, yeah. Well, thanks very much, anyway, Terry, for getting us together. And yeah, it's great to be here on a Sunday night. I've had a bit of a long day doing this and that, so it's great to have a chat. And yeah, I should also say the reason I'm in bed is not because I'm going, oh, I'll just get in bed and have a chat with these Americans and Australians, but like I've actually I broke my leg in 4 places last year, and so I was in bed for like 3 months, and then I had the bright idea of walking down a hill, and then I basically sprained my good leg, and I can't like get out of bed. Anyway, so it's not some big symbolic statement, you know, subversion. I'm in bed or something. It's just the way it is. Anyway, so let's get that out of the way. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. You know, when you're talking so many different topics we could talk about, and you know, you're always going to sound a bit trite, aren't you? Whatever you say, because when you talk about revolution, once you know, oh, okay, you know, whatever you're going to say is going to sound a bit naff, but yes, I mean, I have got skin in the game and what have you, and I have done a lot of thinking. I'm doing a lot of thinking at the moment because I've sort of gone through a bit of a sort of rejigging of what I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to say and what I think about what I need to do and what have you. And yeah, I suppose I have come round to this idea of being a public revolutionary, as Dwayne was saying, and that's a bit of a big move, actually. I've got a feeling like in the US, the notion of revolution is it's a bit like France. Someone told me this a while ago. You know, in France and the US, the revolution is sort of semi-respectable because there was revolutions, right? So it's embedded in the culture somewhat, for better or worse. Well, in the UK, of course, everything's traditionally been, you know, don't get enthusiastic since about 1670, right? You know, so revolution a bit of a foreign idea. Having said that, everything's so fucked up in the UK in its own gloriously peculiar sort of way. It's not quite America, but it's certainly it's not good. Let's put it like that. You know, like everyone's so fed up more than at any point in my lifetime that people seem to, I've done a few public outings recently where I've said, I'm a revolutionary, thinking, oh God, everyone's going to leave the room. But they haven't. In fact, no one's walked out, thankfully. And it's a bit like everyone knows what I'm saying. And I think what people think I'm saying is everything is so fucked, that no one's enthusiastic about anything unless it's going to be a complete change. Not because we're romantic ideologues or anything, but because of the objectivity of the situation, that little changes in 2023 just are not going to do the business as a sociological fact, political fact. And I think there's a sort of cultural lag. It's one of the little sociological phrases I like quite a lot, which is, objectively, we should be doing X, but we only do it like 5 years later. It's about like 2.5, isn't it? And 1.5, it's like everyone should have been saying in 2015, not a chance, and then they wake up in 2023 going, oh, yeah, it was never going to happen, was it? No, okay, right, all right then. But yeah, I think I see myself enabling people to be what they already want to be, which is revolutionaries, in a fairly concretized realist sense, not in, put a post of Che Guevara up on the, it's not performative anymore. It's quite real. And here in the UK, we used to be quite a liberal bunch, as you know. And then, over the last 3 years, government's put 150 people in prison, which is quite an achievement for a liberal democracy, just bang people up right, left and centre for substantial amounts of time. And I think that's because we've actually got quite organised in the UK, and we've actually put up a substantive challenge to the carbon state. And it's a sign of things to come, I think, is we're not going to win this without there being a substantial amount of sacrifice. And, that's in all our histories, obviously. But, as you were saying, being through this period of peace, which is just repressed violence and what have you. But it's coming out, and we need to be spiritually prepared for that so that we don't get drawn into that darkness, which is coming. And for me, that's a big agenda item, really, which is why I was saying to Aaron in that interview that we need to understand what we are here to do, which is not to replicate the violence of the oppressor, but to create something totally different. Not because we're trying to be nice, because being nice isn't a very convincing, but because it's fundamentally against who we are to continue to destroy, if you see what I mean. And that needs some working out, and I'm a bit nervous about it. And I know what Glenn was saying in that quote was sort of, moving towards this idea of, we've been such shits for such a long time. It's going to be, I'm quite looking forward to people being a bit more humble, oh yeah, we did fuck up, didn't we? Really badly. We have fucked up really badly as a civilization, as a human race. And maybe, we know from the history of Christianity, Terry, you know this, right? That when people fuck up, it's actually quite good because it opens people up to some transformative change. And that's a big part of that tradition, isn't it? And, so it's, those are some of the things that I'm sort of rumbling around on in my slightly scatty way. But yeah, that's enough, isn't it? How about that, Terry?
That's excellent. I mean, Glenn, you're going to have a hard act to follow after these two. But Roger, when we come back around to you, I want you to talk about citizens and people's assemblies as means in that direction, and the Humanity Project, which I think is another one you have on the table.
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
Okay, so Glenn, where are we in the
Yeah,
symposium?
as you said, it's there are so many dimensions of this that, as a transdisciplinary thinker, sometimes I think, oh yeah, I'm on top of all this, and it's all making sense. And other times it's war inside my head, a state of confusion where I'm struggling to fight my way out of it. But I did declare World War III in Earth Emotions in 2018, and so I didn't muck around with this idea. Obviously, the greatest evil is war. It has a particular meaning, and I appreciate where it stands. But I agree with Fish in the sense that a state of war, a state of confusion and conflict is where we're at the moment. So I declared World War III, but I made it clear that this is a war of the emotions, and that's why that distinction between the terraforans and the terranacient people is just a new way of redefining or contextualizing aspects of human nature, which we already know about. And so the war of the emotions, I wrote in a kind of optimistic light, would be a way of avoiding a war between nuclear missiles and drones and all of the things that we now can see unfolding in Gaza and other parts of the world. So I'm a realist with respect to the conflict, but I'm hoping that my contribution as a transdisciplinary thinker is that if we can sort out our emotional conflict, we might be able to avoid the worst case scenario, which is the Chris Hedges headline. And so the choreography of Terranacia and Terrafora is all about trying to summarize in a way that might be attractive to a contemporary audience, a secular view of goodness and evil, that this is a way that we can explain aspects of human nature, part of our evolution needing to be both displaying both these terranacient nurturing tendencies, the love, the empathy, and all the rest of it. But the terraforans are just as much part of our evolutionary history and are indeed important parts. And there are many other thinkers. Bill Rees comes to mind straight away as someone that says, you know, a lot of these things were adaptive as part of our evolution, but now they've become maladaptive once connected to a terraforan economic order, otherwise known as capitalism. So I'm trying to fit a model of thinking into a contemporary context, make it as secular as possible, because I think that's where most people are with their own commitments, and to give, in particular, young people a view of our possibilities as humans, a vision of the future, and hence the reason for creating the meme or the mega meme of the Symbiocene, which is to say that terranacient aspect of our past and relictual present is something we can build on. And so I think, and Roger will correct me if I've got it wrong, that this idea that we need to change everything has to include a vision of the future, which is, the opposite of what we now understand the Anthropocene to represent. So I'm characterizing these polarities. Of course, there are nuances in between the poles, so it's not, just simple X and Y and nothing else in between. I'm trying to get the polarities clearly understood so that we can start making choices, and those choices are between, dysbiosis and death and symbiosis and life. I think I agree that the possibilities are now contracting. We're not, the complexity is there, but we either go in a direction where we can see some kind of viable future, or we're not going to do that and we're going to collapse and die. And that's a pretty savage and difficult dichotomy to deal with. So that's pretty much a summary of where I think my position comes from. And I mean, I wrote Earth Emotions in 2017 and 18, and Extinction Rebellion didn't exist at that time. Nor, if it did, it was in its in a form that was very early on and hadn't really become public. And the same with Greta Thunberg. She was obviously at school ruminating, but hadn't created school strike for climate change. I would have loved to have had those kinds of social movements that Greta represents as well in the book, to give an illustration of this changes everything, and how quickly and how deeply we must make these changes. So I'm writing now on a book on the Symbiocene, where I can begin to include many more examples in the social and emotional domain, the cultural domain of some kind of future that is more optimistic than catastrophe and Armageddon. So that I'm still working through these ideas. I'll take all of this coming year to incorporate the new thoughts, and hopefully there'll be some kind of conclusion at the end of it all that's worth reaching. So I'll leave it at that.
Glenn, one of the things that I immediately, I mean, Solastalgia is where I picked up on who you are and what you were working on.
Right.
I will say that Psychoteratica, your journal blog online, and by the way, for those who may be happening to watch, I'll put links in the comments below this video to Clown Crack and Psychoteratica and your website, Roger, so people can get much more of what's needed. But back to what I was saying, Glenn, one of the things that grabbed me right away about your work is I've been struggling with just how right Orwell was in the fact that we don't have an adequate language anymore to talk about the truth and the reality we're living in.
Yep.
You can't utter a single 3-word phrase that isn't loaded with emotional baggage in an ordinary conversation in the street or in an academic ivory tower. You bring in anything into conversation that is meaningful, rich with any kind of meaning, good or evil, Terra Thorn or Terra Nation. And the Terra Thorn and Terra Nation have no baggage, which is what that's right into what you were doing. Here's a language that Orwell didn't know about that gives us a new way to build meaning. I really love it.
I'm hoping that language building has many, or there are many reasons for doing it. One of them is that the world is changing so rapidly that our language hasn't kept up. So there's an obvious reason for building language. The other one, I guess, is Wittgensteinian, that the limits of my language are the limits of my world. Well, I want to blow that away with more language, challenge people with the existing language where our language is inadequate, introduce new terms if necessary, examine other cultures and other languages to see what contribution they can make to a more expansive understanding of what's going on. So I don't do it just because I'm pissed off with existing language. I think we're struggling with language to map or cover the extent and severity of changes that have taken place, particularly in the last 50 years, but over the Industrial Revolution and wherever you wish to start the period of the Great Turning, where we moved from being a terra-nascent species to a terra-foreign one. Well, it could have been 500 years ago. It may have been at the start of the Agricultural Revolution. I don't really know, but I think it started on the 5th of March, 1953, which was the day that I was born. So that's how I anchor it. It's a pretty good date to start a few things like the Anthropocene.
I go back 4 years further and I feel like I just fell right into it.
Yeah. Well, I start the book Earth Emotions by saying I'm a child of the Anthropocene.
Yeah.
Well, one thing, can I just jump in with something?
Absolutely.
Really great point. I think that about that Glenn was making about the limitations of language and sort of what is happening now with the distraction of social media and certain technologies that, have turned everything into a kind of, it's staccato, it's short form. There's no time for contemplation. And if you don't have time for contemplation, there's no opportunity to build wisdom about anything. And I think one thing that we all have to recognize is the destruction of the arts community over the last 50 years. Is a hugely contributing, and it's a factor that we cannot ignore, because if you look through history and you look at successes when it comes to revolutionary thinking and also moving the ball forward with ideas about democracy and participation and listening to marginalized voices and so forth, and extending human rights and all the different places where it has succeeded. A really profound catalyst in all of those movements was the arts community, because remember, the arts community has always been there to allow a reconfiguration of thinking, suggesting radical new ways to consider things. You could go in, like, for example, rather than just allow people in power to frame all the parameters of the discussion and segment people into their proper categories. This allows that idea that we're all human beings. And I've even, like, for example, if you want to figure out what is the number one thing you can call somebody to shut down conversation and to vilify them, you call them a Nazi, right? The arts community is what I see as the only community who would be capable of creating a piece of theater where they can communicate that Nazis were not monsters in the sense that they weren't human. They were human beings that became complicit with monstrous ideas, surrendered to them somehow, contributed to the practice of monstrous ideas. So if you have a way to interrogate bullshit to get to what is the through line, human beings who operate at different levels of enlightenment and different levels of ignorance, and their brains are attached to their hands. So sometimes they are going to do monstrous things, but they're also going to be able to do benign and beautiful things. So I would say, Glenn, like, if you're going to have something where you're addressing the necessity for a language that is deeper, go to the non-lingual language, which is imagery, music, all of these things that we congregate around to remind ourselves that we're vulnerable and our lives are worth living. Because we all have, with luck and grace, we all have those tendencies in our lives who want to congregate with each other or even with ourselves to remind ourselves that we're human beings. And that's what makes us precious. And that's what makes us, I think that's what turns us into revolutionaries. Because if we can have the arts community to remind us that we are worth saving, because I think that's what it does, then we are revolutionized, because then we're going to say, fuck that, I am precious. I have this vocabulary through the arts community, and I'm going to protect it. That's how I'm going to be politicized. I think the best way to politicize somebody is through other channels outside, because politics can tend to turn people off, because it moves very slow. There's so much compromise in politics, and so many people, their understanding of politics is, if I can get this into the right politician's inbox, have them try to figure out how to have empathy, apply the necessary relief to what is being proposed by what is in my inbox. How am I going to compromise to get this moved into the next inbox, to the next inbox, to the next inbox, until it's so fractionalized that nothing gets done? In the 1960s, it was just like, you're not even invited to the conversation. In the United States, it was just like the Democrats and the Republicans. No, that's mom and dad. So the Comics Underground movement in particular was just like thumbing their nose, fuck you, mom and dad. It's going to be up to us now. We have our own responsibility to build our own lives. Then you have the feminization of society, you have the environmental movement, you have civil rights. All of this stuff exploded, not because it was asking for permission from the people in power or the establishment. It was saying, we're going to do it without the establishment.
And it got nailed to a cross for doing that. Yeah.
Right. But yeah, but there's still great, what we have gotten from that movement, is something we can't, delegitimize or just say that
Oh, no.
certainly it doesn't feel like enough, obviously,
Yeah.
because,
But-
the problems continue to expand and are now literally threatening everything,
Yeah.
but at least there is the opportunity for that kind of vocabulary, because I think that if we just recognize it, we can access it. It's already happened.
Well, just briefly, I can say with some pride that many of the concepts, particularly solastalgia, that I've developed, have been taken up by the arts and creative communities, and so there's a much wider coverage of my work in the arts community than there is in philosophy or sociology or other academic channels. So at any one time during a week, there's exhibitions on somewhere in the world that are featuring solastalgia. And so I can see the point you're making very clearly. Of course, I'm not an artistic toenail. I'm now totally reliant on these brilliant people around the world picking up on these themes and doing with them what they see fit. And most of the time, it's fantastic, creative, and revolutionary work that they're doing. So that's all I wanted to add, was that I totally agree that artistic arm or element of creativity is critical to this next phase that hopefully is not Armageddon, but is the more creative possibility that is present to us.
Yeah. Actually, Glenn, I asked, there was a time when Fish would do a drawing a month if you were a patron of his on Patreon, and I sent him solastalgia as a word to do a drawing around.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to find it, but my search feature, because of all the bandwidth being taken up, my search feature is not working real well. But I think I sent it to you. It's a bottle with a fish on the bottom floating.
I had it.
Great.
I have it.
Roger, and all three of you, I want to speak to this, but Roger, I want to start with you. But I want to interject a thought based on what both you, Glenn, and Fish have said. Philosophically, the framing of my thinking is always around Charles Sanders Peirce, the American Aristotle, as he's known in the UK by Bertrand Russell and Whitehead back in that day. But he was a semiotician and a pragmatist. And pragmatics, as we understand it, was kind of corrupted by Harvard academics from what Peirce originally thought. So pragmatically, I know the practical is, and the pragmatic is where you want to live, Roger, and I totally respect and honor that. No buts. I just want to point out from Peirce, the reason that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and it is, and then some, goes to exactly what Fish was talking about. Icons are signs that represent things because they resemble or they have familiarity emotionally, not symbolically like language. Language is a made-up system based on habits and rules and conventions. It's symbol systems. But the arts, the aesthetics, even of the written language, is the iconic power that they have, the familiarity that stirs within us when we see an image. That happens instantly. The symbolic has to feed its way through the alphabet and the lexicon and the paragraph and all of that. And then maybe it'll make you feel something. I don't want to diminish books with a written word, but I much prefer comic books all the way back to when I was a kid because I had pictures with the words and you could respond to the imagery instantly, even before you had a chance to think about it, which is, I think, a really good thing. So what I want to go to for all three of you, maybe this will wrap us up. I'm shutting off an alarm. All three of you are working directly with the generations behind me or ahead of me, my millennial daughter, my Gen X stepdaughter, and my Gen whatever they are grandchildren. But you, Fish, I know you do. You lecture at, is it Penn State?
Yeah, at Annenberg at University of Pennsylvania.
Annenberg, right. So you lecture to like college age kids today, maybe a few older and younger in the crowd. Roger, I know you're out there in the streets and in meetings and in sessions constantly with the British youth, the generations younger than you and me both, right? And Glenn, I know you're out there speaking and talking and communicating with that same generation. Now, where I live in Florida, in what I would call the magic kingdom of magical thinking, I can't get 3 kids together to talk about anything. The only time I get an opportunity to do that is when I go to my daughter's writing workshop. Then I'm in a room of millennials, and I've earned their trust and their confidence and some of their respect, and so I can have conversations with them. But a university won't let me anywhere near them. I mean, all they do is take one look at my social media and they go, no, no, this guy is not allowed on campus. You remember what we did with the walk with Nick, Roger, back in the day. Anyway, all of that to say, I'd like for each of you to tell me, what are you experiencing in your efforts to influence or to awaken or to inspire or to get these to untangle this Gordian knot of reality that we've tied ourselves into? What are you experiencing in those relationships, those communications with the younger generations behind, ahead of us?
Yeah. Well, I can say a few things.
Please.
Is it my turn?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is all, we're in very interesting times, aren't we? And they're about to get even more interesting, in the Chinese sense. And I think what I'm trying to communicate to people is, which is obviously a bit of an uphill struggle, is the next 10 to 20 years are going to look nothing like the last 30 and potentially not the last 1,000, right? It's all going to blow up, guys. It's maths. It's going to go. And, whether you like it or not, and, as you say, I'm pretty pragmatic, I'm not saying what happened in the past is totally terrible. What's going to happen in the future? I'm just saying it's just not add up, right? The numbers don't add up. And, Florida is going to be evacuated. It is going to happen. So for me, like when I was in prison for 4 months, dare I say it, and I thought, I better read up on this revolution business because I've been wandering around going, hey, let's do this revolution thing. I thought I better get a bit more up with up with it. So I read a few books and things, and it was really good because as a sociologist, I'm always looking for patterns, and there's all these patterns that happened in previous revolutions. So it's not like we're starting from zero here, right? Societies have gone through massive traumas, every 30, 50 years for the last 2,000 years. It's not like we don't know what happens. And one of the fundamental things that I'm interested in, and this, relates to how to communicate to younger people, and also, what Glenn and Fish are doing, like in terms of, we're all involved in communication, aren't we? And it's like, how does this all fit together? And there's various different bits which I'm sort of working, but one of the main bits is that people in the past just didn't have so much self-pity that our culture did. And this is really important, aside from whether it's a good or bad idea. It's obviously massively important for a revolutionary movement to enjoy itself, right? In its certainty that it doesn't give a fuck, and I think this is what you're saying, Fish, about, artists in revolutions. They're basically, they don't care. They are doing their thing, and obviously that was a big thing in the late 60s. And I always try and remind young people, in 1962, was it, when they had Students for a Democratic Society, and you had all these people in little thin ties, like the early Beatles. And then by 1968, they're doing somersaults in front of judges, right? What the fuck happened in 6 years? And they're going, well, we know what happened. Vietnam happened, but something deeper happened, which was a complete challenge to a system of meaning that had been inherited out of the Second World War and, all the rest of it. right? I mean, there's loads, it's complicated business, but it's really interesting how culture can change from a deference orientation and a self-pity vulnerability orientation to I'm just living my life, which is how I want to put it to people. I'm experimenting with different phrases, but it's like I'm living my life, If they put me in prison, I don't give a fuck. It's like, it's like you're sort of subliminally implying, oh yeah, on Friday, Rogers might go to prison, and isn't that terrible? No, it's not terrible. It's like it's what you do at this time in history, and I genuinely don't give a fuck. I mean, it's difficult because I'm going to have to not, do. There's loads of things I want to do. You know what I mean? And I've got relationships and things, and all this sort of thing. But in terms of the political metaphysics, as it were, it doesn't matter, and that's a big change which needs to happen. And that's one of the big things we need to communicate. I've got this phrase, the joy of revolution, which doesn't avoid the horror and the despair, but comes out of the horror and despair. Because if what we're facing is so horrible and despairing, then let's just live our lives. Let's not have this control fetish that we can actually, things have to work. And then everyone just becomes really cautious and stressy. You see what I mean? So that's one major thing. So for me, like, it doesn't, when I go in front of young people, there's this thing, oh, the young people, you can't tell them what to do. We're all the bad old guys. I go into talk young people and I say, you don't know shit. And I'm going to tell you some things, and you know how it works, right? You get respected because you're not bullshitting. So, I'm obviously not telling, I'm not going to the extreme of being, sadistic and anything stupid like that. But it's like being honest and saying, I've been, organizing people every week for 40 years. I know a thing or two, guys, right? Here's some ideas. And obviously you can tell me to piss off, but, I am doing my thing because fundamentally I am not interested in persuading them. And this is the critical thing about revolutionary confidence, is instead of going, oh my God, revolution is going to be really difficult, everything's against us, or, no disrespect, well, this is American left defeatism, right? It's like everyone excels at saying how bad everything is. Happens across the whole Western world. I'm not interested in how bad things are. All I'm interested in is how to enjoy my life. You see, that's a different thing altogether. And this is what I read from revolutionaries in the past. And that's why they ended up not worrying about being shot and being put into prison and how they took over states, is because they knew their stuff and they were coming for you, and maybe they wouldn't get there, or maybe they would. I mean, what Castro going to Cuba. I mean, what a shit show. He gets a ship. It's going to sink. And they go, fuck it, we're still doing it. I mean, what dickheads? I mean, you've got to laugh, haven't you? Then they arrive on the coast of Cuba, they all get shot. And, I mean, what keeps people going like that? What keeps people being is a zest for the actuality of life. You see what I mean? Not always thinking about, well, let's do a cost benefit analysis of when we arrive on the coast. No, oh my God, it's not very good. Let's go and talk about it for the next 20 years and be miserable in some university in Mexico. You see what I'm saying? Like, this is what I want to revitalize in the younger generation. And then the other thing I want to say, sorry, I'll shut up. The other thing, which is a bit different, but it applies to what Fish and Glenn are doing, is I think everything needs to come together in what I call like a close ecological relationship. So I don't want, I don't want everyone in this call to join my organization, you know what I mean? And you have to leave what you're doing in that sort of Leninist old 20th century. But I just totally fucked off with horizontalism, and everyone's doing their own thing in their own little way, and they're contributing, doing a course here. And, it's all like, it's just privileged, rubbish, right? It's a serious fucking situation we've got, and we need to come together in big formations. So you don't want Chris Hedges just going around doing a few talks every now and again. He needs to talk within a movement, right? Be independent within the movement and tell the movement what shit's going on if needs be, right? But he needs to be in that movement. I'm sure you won't mind me saying this. And, so that's what I'm trying to to do. And obviously at some point it's going to coalesce. And then, you know, we're talking about something interesting. And within that movement, you've got these different elements of speech and action and art all coming together. And it's the coming together of them that you see in revolutionary periods. You know, so it's, you know, we're all agreed on this call, aren't we, right? Vision, music, sound, culture. This is how revolutions happen. They don't, like you're saying, Fish, it's nothing to do with politics. It's when revolutions happen when politics is a dirty word. No one's interested in politics, which is of itself a massively political position, right? Because you're rejecting the whole thing. So again, it's like we just need to detach ourselves gloriously from the whole reformist space, you know, say we're not doing that shit anymore. We're going off to enjoy ourselves. And they'll go, oh, you know, that's really irresponsible. All these people used to say to me, well, Roger, if you do that, you'll make yourself irrelevant. Has anyone said that to you? If you publish that book, you'll make yourself irrelevant. And it's like, well, I know I'm on number 34, so I'm not doing so bad.
Well, Roger, I will say, for those who might not know, I started in 2016 working on a doctorate degree. I tried once back in the 80s and didn't get there, got all the core. Anyway, I won't go into the details. But anyway, in my studies, I discovered and reawakened to what I was doing back when Rachel Carson came out with Silent Spring and Schumacher wrote Small is Beautiful and those kinds of things. That was my awakening to the ecological reality we were facing. And Greg Bateson, man, his Steps to an Ecology of Mind, that image on the cover of his book is still with me. And now looking at it through a 21st century lens, I went through a lot of that work again and a lot of the more recent work by leading ecologists. And that's where I found you, all three of you. March of 2019, I think, Roger, is when I first known Extinction Rebellion. But Fish, I want to say, I came out of those studies with a grasp of the reality of the doom trajectory that we're on. And I asked myself the very question, Roger, so who am I to be and what am I to do? How am I to live my life in light of this? And Fish, I got to say, if I hadn't found your gallows humor and your graveyard jests, it would have been a much harder struggle. You made it possible for me to laugh at myself trying to find that path. You made me look in the mirror and see that side of me that pumps 20 gallons into my Toyota Highlander and doesn't give it a second thought, you know?
Right.
You made me face that Grim Reaper and realize what Roger's talking about, that it doesn't matter what happens 5 seconds from now. It's what I'm doing right now that
Exactly.
matters.
Yeah.
That's where the joy is.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, just to harken back to what I was saying about the arts community, when you're experiencing art, it's one of those few kinds of communication that demands that you exist in the moment that you're in. And if you do that, then you're grounded and you are in total recognition of all of these things that we've just been talking about today. And I think that to Roger's point, it's funny because people, and I don't know if what your experience, Terry, was the first time you and I spoke, but there's people who have followed my work and they either are really into it because I go to very, very dark places. Some people like it because I go to dark places, but if you look at my books and you look at the stuff I publish, there's a lot of dick jokes, right?
Yeah.
And so when people have met me, they're just like, wow, I expected somebody who was just so tortured and broken in an interesting way.
Yeah.
And then they meet me and it's just like something seems like it's wrong with you, because I genuinely wake up every day excited. Just because it's just like I only have control over this moment that I'm in. And what am I going to do with this moment that I'm in? I'm going to think of a dick joke, or if I'm really pissed off, I'm going to draw something that is like really angry. But I'm never really overwhelmed with either one of those things. I ping pong around. We all are jerked around by our emotional realities, by any number of, for any number of reasons every single day. And I think getting back to what you were, the question about accessing younger people, having college age students in front of me, and a number of activist young people that I'm in constant contact with, you feel kind of invincible. You know, you're more willing to take chances when you're that age. You know, I think we can all harken back to when that was true. And they're also very curious to learn about past successes done by quote unquote outlaws. You know, people who existed outside the system and were really, really interesting and really, really cool. That's the other, you know, we want to make revolution as sexy as hell. You know, that's going to get people involved, you know. So you need a soundtrack, you know, you need a wardrobe, you need all of these things, you know, that make it really, really interesting and fun. And also the young people that I communicate with, they also recognize how bad things are. It's unavoidable, you know. So it's much easier now, even in the last 5 years, to have a conversation about, you know, environmental collapse, about the dangers of capitalism. This is stuff that I just in front of a classroom. It was always a little strange, you know, when we would try to talk about, let's expand our understanding about what violence is. You know, so then you start to say, you know, the rewards that you get for participating in you know, capitalism and the commodification of everything, that is a very deep, dark form of violence.
Mhm.
I can have that conversation effortlessly now, and they will participate. Same thing with what's going on with Israel and Gaza. This is the first time in the last few years where you could have, to an extent, because I've recently gotten in trouble on campus for this, because blood is in the water on college campuses
I
about.
saw that article, yeah.
Yeah, so if you go against, the most minimal thing, if you even ask for a ceasefire for what's happening in Gaza, you're an anti-Semite, you know, and then there will be movements to try to get you fired and vilified and all that sort of stuff. But I think that that's just a testament to people. They're scared now because that conversation is eking into common speech much more than it ever has. So it's those moments of hope when I see young people who are brave enough, they don't know to be scared to have those conversations. And they also recognize, particularly here in the States, that the people who have their reins on power, they're all old, by and large, old white men.
Yeah.
And they smell it in the air. There's going to be a massive die-off. And all of a sudden, there might be some more, you know, greater access to people that you know, might have a greater tendency to understand the imperatives of, you know, the environment, all the other stuff that we're talking about. You know, that's the hope they have. But
Yeah.
you know, it's my job to show them people like Lenny Bruce, show them, you know, the counterculture, you know, the beat movement, things that aren't political. Coltrane to me is just like, these things are frontierism in the radical sort of way that again remind people who we are, what we are, why we are worth saving, and it politicizes them in that way. And then they'll just see how thin and tinny politics are, and hopefully we can build a society that tries to integrate humanity into the equation and not being led by politics.
One of the few things I've come up with that I enter in, when I'm in a conversation with millennials, especially the 30 somethings and around that age group, like my daughter. One of the things I've done a couple of times is she had a birthday party, for instance, at a local park nearby a couple of years ago. And she had about 15 of her friends there. And my wife was with me, and we went, and there were not any other parents, no other boomers, but there were some other of their age. And we were just kind of all talking around, and I took the opportunity to point out that the simplest way to think of me is as a boomer doomster. And that kind of got their attention. And then I said, so I want to start by apologizing to you for my generation, because we're the ones that fucked your future. And the shocked look on their face made it worth it. But the value of taking that step was that it gave me some credibility. I wouldn't go so far as say it gained their trust or that it moved them very far off center, but it kind of shook the foundations of how they relate to my age group. Because face it, I look like a MAGA Republican, just visually. I can't help that, you know. But be that as it may, contrary to that initial impression appearance, to give them that statement of apology up front kind of shook their perspective of me. It's again the iconic thing, the aesthetics not living up to the appearance, you know? And so anyway, that was a great help. So Glenn, when you're out there and you're interacting with these youngsters compared to me, and most of you, Fish, you're the youngster in this crowd pretty much, but albeit as it may, how are they receiving your message or the message of what, again, I would call your revolutionary shift or your paradigm shift, I think is better. The paradigm shift that you're bringing to the table with Psychos Radica.
Well, I think I work with groups like Rising Tide, which are opposed to the coal industry in Australia, the whole coal chain from mining through to the export of black coal mainly. I, until a couple of weeks ago, lived in the Hunter Valley, which is the main area in Australia where black coal is mined, burnt, and exported. So Rising Tide have been around for a very long time, well before Extinction Rebellion and Greta. And so many of them were my students while I was teaching at university. And so I've felt almost fatherly or grandfatherly towards this particularly brave bunch of activists. And of course, they've all been in jail recently. And I used to write letters arguing the point to judges that the real criminals were those that were arresting them, and that these people were doing the right thing by all of us. What I've moved to, I still give talks to Rising Tide and the local branches of Extinction Rebellion. But I try now to address generation symbiocene, which I think takes Roger's point about the need for expanding the base, for expanding the movement. We can't keep isolating and pretending that just by our own individual and small group efforts, this revolution, if it's the right word, is going to take place. So I talk about generation symbiocene, I call it Gen S. Robert McFarlane wrote a great article on generation Anthropocene, and I felt that I needed to write something not in opposition to what he was saying, but presenting a different account of what the potential of the generations are. And so Gen S is my attempt to engage the different generations, whatever we call them, and to argue and to help them see that there is a united cause here. I'm motivated, I guess, by the fact that I am a father and a grandfather. I see the ethics of the situation of what Tim Flannery called future eating, or fucking the future, whatever expression you wish to use. That this is something that is transgenerational, that even baby boomers understand that you're left with nothing at the end of your life, and that and if you're leaving a legacy of further damage and desolation, mental and physical desolation, that this is not a good death. So I'm hoping that the different generations will see the point of what a vision of a good life is, and it's particularly relevant for the very young. You can't talk to them and give them a good hard-headed talk on what's going wrong and what the implications are for them. The teenagers, the school strike age, they're all part of my grandchildren, and I think they understand really well what's going wrong. The young adults at university, and I haven't taught at university now for at least 15 years, but when I get invited back, I sense the urgency that they have for some kind of guidance, but also we're in this together. We need to have this cross-factional alignments, the attempt to get a movement which has some kind of universality to it, because we've gone from tribal patch disturbing species to a globalized one, and most of our our university students can see that clearly, but they don't know what comes next. So generation symbiocene, the symbiocene itself as an idea, my attempts to work at cross-generational, cross-factional, anti-political in the orthodox political sense, feelings, directions towards which we can go. So I talk about radical anticipation of a future. I don't talk about hope, because hopium and all the rest of it have done the work of even destroying hope. So radical anticipation of a future that's a lot better than the one that we can foresee now is the basis of my work. And I could do a really good job of being hugely negative, and I could write the terraform stories to terrify people and become hopefully a best-selling rich author. But I've chosen the opposite path, which is zero money, a life of volunteering, in a sense, to try and present a different worldview. And of course, that's hugely you're either a megalomaniac or your level of humility is too great. But somewhere in between those things, I feel I'm struggling with the task of bringing together these generations. I've given them a name. I've given them an acronym, Gen S. I mean, what more can I do?
That's wonderful. Well,
I think I just got something to say. Yeah, I think what I'm sitting here thinking is we've got one or two themes here, right? Which is the empowerment of the younger generation. And then we've got this theme of revolution. And I quite like, when we're talking about language, if you look at previous movements, either cultural or political, they basically rotate around a word or a phrase. Like radical anticipation of the future. It's great. It'll be great for that to become, a watch phrase. You see what I mean? For a new movement. So because at the moment we have hope and no hope, and both of them are a bit shit, right? So
Exactly.
It's like we need these new phrases. I'm totally into it, just as we need new visual memes and all this sort of stuff. And I think, basically what I think is revolution is the word. Like with punks, punk was a word of, of denigration, right? And then people said, I don't give a fuck, I'm going to be a punk. And then punk became cool. And, same with queer and gay. It was like, oh, you're queer, oh, that's terrible. Oh, no, I'm fucking queer, fuck you. It's like, we're revolutionaries. And everyone's, our generation for the last 30 years, revolution has been, oh, you're just a dick if you're a revolutionary, right? You're either some weird academic or you're just some hard left sort of, and we say, no, we are revolutionaries. And there's something about the transgression of actually what revolution means is we want a totally different situation, which is the subliminal feeling of this whole zeitgeist that's emerging, amongst the younger generation, and obviously right across society. And, it's all getting deformed into fascism and all the rest of it, right? But leaving that aside, I think what I've just got this idea. I'm always thinking of practical ideas. Of our little conversation here. What if we had an international conference called Revolution in the 21st Century, which is my little thing, catchphrase. And then you just have a whole bunch of people talking and doing workshops, but they've all got one thing in common, which is the whole thing is fucked and we need something totally different. You see what I mean? There's no reformists. There's no one going, so what I suggest you do is set up a nice campaign group and, go and lobby your MP. There's none of that. Right. There's all the pathways are through to linguistic, artistic, and political transgression and fusions between the two. So there's practical pathways, there's projects so people can combine together. And initially, what it's like, right? There's maybe 1,000 people interested in this, but I'm totally optimistic about the idea it's going to be like 100 million in 10 years, and that's how things start off, because that's what I've studied. I'm completely unafraid of 4 guys on a Zoom. I remember reading about the communists, I think they met in 1905 in a London pub, and there were 43 of them, and they split. They split that weekend. And, one of them was Lenin, and like 10 years later, they're running Russia. you know, I don't give a shit about the communists. You know what I mean? I'm just looking at the social dynamics.
Yeah.
That, you know, in the same with art, isn't it? You know, you've got some guy, he's got a vision, and 10 years later, that is the main thing.
Yep.
And, you know, that's the joy of life for me. It's the complete ability for small groups of people to have massive effects because they're just doing something cool and with integrity. And we all know on this call, we've got that, you know, let's not be falsely humble about it. We know what's coming, and most people don't want to look at it. So whatever we're saying and the people we influence are going to be the next major thing, you know, assuming we don't have fascism. You see what I mean? We are it. And that's that sense of, you know, the little hairs on your back sticking up, you know, or is it on the back of your neck? You know, that phrase, you know, that when I talk to audiences and I say, this is it, you can tell that they suddenly got this enchantment about their lives again, that they're going to, you see what I'm trying to say? They think, oh, right, they're part of history. They're part of the human story. They're not looking in on this terminal crisis and just feeling miserable in their bedsits. They're going, oh, no, let's, you know, let's do it. You know, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So I'll be emailing you all.
Well,
That's a problem. Do a Zoom, Roger. He's got a plan straight away.
well,
No, I like it.
happy to
It's
sign
like,
up for it, Roger. I really will.
I was going to say, we're engaged in evolution and the R is silent.
There you go.
Yeah,
There
yeah.
you go. We have really gone well into a second hour here. And I'm inclined to say, I would love to do this again. The four of us again. I won't put it on a calendar yet. I'll just stay in touch with you and we'll see about maybe we can do this again someday in the not too distant future. But two things came to mind. One, I found that drawing, so that fish drawing. So I want to share that just in case it's not fresh in everyone's memory. So bear with me. Remind me to unshare.
Right. There it is.
Yeah. I just, Fish was running this thing where he said to his patrons on Patreon, he said, if you want to send me a single word, I'll whip out a sketch for it and send it back to you. So I sent him Solastalgia. I think it was the first one I sent you.
I think so.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
It's one of my favorites of your drawings, of course. All right,
2 seconds.
Philosophically, we've touched on all of the key topics. We've touched on aesthetics deeply. We've touched on ethics deeply. We've touched on politics or political philosophy, philosophy of language. I mean, much of the philosophical spectrum has come up in the conversation. So thank you, because that's exactly what I wanted to have happen. Mm-hmm. The other dimension to my favorite philosophers are the Stoics. In particular, one of the lesser known Stoics for whom a butterfly is named, Chrysippus, because I'm kind of an obsessive logician. And Chrysippus was the logician for the Stoics. And in my imagination, there was a time when the Stoics, with Chrysippus as their spokesperson, and the Aristotelians, with Aristotle as their spokesperson, they had an argument over whose logic was going to dominate. Well, the common perception of Chrysippus' logic was, if the gods use any logic at all, it's Chrysippus. But the Aristotelians won out. And 2,000 years later, we finally figured out that was an inadequate logic for science. Took 2,000 years, and Russell and Whitehead had to prove just how inadequate it was. Anyway, that's the almost last philosophical comment I'll make, and this is the last one. A common theme that I'm picking up here among the four of us was a two-word phrase Latin phrase that comes right out of the Stoics. Amor fati, love your fate. And if we can do that, we might just have a chance for a symbiocene future. So anyway, gentlemen, I can't thank you enough. You've been brilliant. You've been inspiring. You've been engaging and enticing. And I just thank you for spending the time with me and with each other. So
Thank you
with
for
that,
setting this up, Terry.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks so
All right.
much.
so
Anytime.
I'm gonna stop my recording, Glenn. If you want to stop yours, we'll have a couple more minutes and then we'll
Yep.
finish it up.
All right. So